very generous and kind introduction. I'm always surprised when I'm introduced pretty much the way I wrote it, so I'm grateful to you for sticking to the script here today. And I want to thank all of you in the audience for your very warm reception. I have had the privilege over my public career of working with several members of the audience to try and advance the cause that has gathered us here today, to lift the designation MEK, and to promote those who seek reform and democracy within the nation of Iran. And I stood for that. I've been privileged to work with you in this regard, not only because I feel that it is right for the people of Iran, but because I feel it is in the best interests of the people of the United States of America as well. I'm privileged to be a part of this distinguished panel today. I can't help but think, Ambassador, back to something that President Kennedy once said when he and Mrs. Kennedy gathered in the White House every living Nobel laureate from the United States of America for dinner one evening. And in addressing the Nobel laureates, he said, "This is the most talented group that has gathered in the White House since Thomas Jefferson died alone." So I'm privileged to be with such a talented group here today. We don't have nearly as much time as we would like, and much of what I believe has already been said. But let me begin by addressing those at Camp Ashraf who are watching us today, and all of you about the video, the very emotional video that began these proceedings. I would encourage this group to disseminate this video as widely as possible. Because to the extent that I understand my fellow countrymen and women, I believe that those images, which are more powerful than anything that can be said, will stir the moral indignation of the American people in a way that will advance the cause that has gathered us here today. There is no society on earth, no religion, no nationality, that would support the kind of brutality, the senseless killing of unarmed civilians, the slaughter of women that we witnessed in that video. That violates every code of conduct of human decency of which I am aware. And I'm confident the American people will rally to our side once they've been informed about the terrible events of last Friday. And the fact that this was carried out by a regime that currently enjoys the substantial financial support of the American people and the continued military protection, at least in part, of the American armed forces, will stir the American people to our side even more than would ordinarily be the case. It is simply unacceptable that the regime allied with us would engage in such crimes against humanity as we witnessed in that video. So I say to you, the American people, stand by your side. With regard to Iran, the Iranian regime views the events that are sweeping across the Middle East as a transforming period, and they are emboldened and are looking at this in a very opportunistic way. They wrongly view this Arab Spring as being inspired by the revolution that took place in Iran back in 1979. They wrongly view the events across the Middle East as being inspired by anti-Western sentiment, anti-Israeli sentiment. And they wrongly view these events as being inspired by religious fervor. They view this in a very egotistical way. And yet they are moving forward to try and take advantage of it, even though their analysis of the situation is fundamentally flawed. They are seeking to insert themselves in Bahrain as a first step toward destabilizing the Arabian Peninsula. They are seeking to insert themselves in Yemen to further destabilize that very troubled country, which is one of the foremost platforms from which terrorist strikes could currently be launched against both Western Europe and against the United States of America. They are seeking to use their influence in Iraq to chart the course of that nation, and there is no doubt that their hand was behind the atrocities committed at Camp Ashraf. They work through Hezbollah to exert their influence around the world. And make no mistake, as we contemplate, as I believe the generals were right to point out, the military option must remain on the table, but as we contemplate possibly resorting to that at some future date, there is no doubt in my mind that the Iranians would seek to retaliate against us by killing Americans in Iraq, in embassies, in social gatherings, in business establishments across the world, using their intermediates at Hezbollah. They're reaching out to establish influence with Hamas to frustrate the possibility of peace between the Palestinians and the Israeli people. They continue to pursue nuclear weapons and a nuclear capability that would deeply destabilize the Middle East, which is already troubled enough. They do not feel compelled at this moment to compromise with those who seek reform and democracy within Iran, because it is their impression that the use of brutality will suffice, at least for the time being, to put off the day of reckoning. So that is the Iranian regime's mindset at this moment. But they are not without their own challenges, as those of you in the room would understand very well. The Iranian economy is deeply troubled. There's a rising generation of Iranian youth that are going to have a great deal of difficulty realizing their economic aspirations in addition to their political ones. The rate of unemployment is very high. The rate of GDP growth is very low. The rate of inflation is accelerating. The regime's dependence upon petroleum and energy exports at a time when prices rise, they can muddle through, but in the long run, when eventually they are opened up to competition in the global economy, this will put great pressure upon the Iranian regime economically. And if you look across history, any regime that over time attempts to both prosper economically but continue to repress their people the way this regime has done runs into deep, deep trouble. So they are momentarily triumphalist, but they have severe challenges that they are not doing nearly enough to address. In a situation like this, what should the American policy be? I think we have to start with the clear understanding that we can no longer delude ourselves into believing that a policy of an engagement or appeasement with the regime in Iran will be successful. It simply will not work. This regime respects only strength. They respect only pressure, and either the use of force or the credible threat of the use of force. It is important that we deal with the Iranian regime not as we wish it were, or as it someday might be, but as it currently is. Now, what does that mean? That means continuing to do what we can to help the dissident groups, both in Ashraf and within Iran, both overtly and covertly, continue to bring pressure for change and greater freedom upon the regime in Tehran. It means continuing to use means, both overt and covert, to frustrate and to continue to put off the Iranian program within the Iranian nuclear program within Iran. It means continuing to implement the sanctions regime and target them in ways that are both tough and smart upon the leaders in Tehran, the Revolutionary Guards, their economic interests, their resources outside of that nation, to continue to bring pressure upon their own personal interests. It means being unequivocal with regimes with which we work, such as that in Baghdad, in Iraq, that they simply must choose. They can work with us and receive the benefits of American support and largesse, or they can try and placate Iran, but they can no longer do both. And the cynical and reprehensible attack upon Ashraf should cause us to very clearly communicate with the Maliki regime that this sort of thing is intolerable, and if repeated, will mean a complete rupture in relations with the United States of America. Let me conclude by saying this. Senator Bradley will recall, no doubt, are accustomed to speaking at great length, but we don't have that privilege here today. You know, as I look across the developments in the region, it would be easy to become cynical or pessimistic. You look at the brutality in the streets of Iran, the manipulating of the election, the attack on Ashraf, the demonstrations being repressed in Damascus, the assassination in Lebanon several years ago. There is evil in the world, regrettably, and it's important to recognize it when we see it. But at the same time, I would like to leave you on a hopeful and optimistic note, because I believe that when we stand with the cause that has gathered us here today, we put both ourselves and the United States of America on both the right side of human history and the right side of human nature. We're on the right side of human history Because the cause for which we stand today, from the hillsides in ancient Athens, to the fields of Runnymede, to here in our own country, the village greens in Lexington and Concord, the cause of freedom has proven to be a very powerful force for change across human history. The freedom to choose your own leaders, the freedom to speak your mind as you see fit, to worship God as you see fit, the freedom to enjoy the fruits of your own labors. This has proven to be more powerful than any despot, than any dictator, than any theocracy. And when we align ourselves with freedom, I believe we will align ourselves with a cause that will ultimately triumph, both in Iran and elsewhere across the Middle East. It will not be easy. There will be disappointments. There will be further heartbreaks, regrettably, including the woman who's been referenced here earlier today who not only lost her daughter, but lost that daughter while another daughter was in the process of giving birth to a grandchild. I can only begin to imagine the pain and suffering that that entails. But when we stand with her and the cause that she represents, and that those who are viewing us from Camp Ashcroft today represent, we also stand on the right side of human nature. Because in spite of the repression, in spite of the evil that we have seen, I fundamentally believe in the long run that knowledge is more powerful than ignorance, that truth is more powerful than deceit, and that love is more ennobling than hate. It is those values that we represent today, and those values that with the blessing of Almighty God, in whatever tradition, and by whatever name we reference it, will ultimately give the people of Iran their freedom, and in so doing secure for them and for us a better and more decent world. And I'm proud to lend my voice to that cause today.